Welcome back, my fellow Dunatics, and happy holidays! I wanted to sneak one last Dune video in for the year now that Dune Prophecy has finished its first season, especially because there is a lot to talk about. Our first on-screen foray into the world of Dune beyond Paul Atreides brought us our first look at the Great Revolt, finally gave us some answers to major cliffhangers from the books, and also left us with plenty of questions. So today I'm hoping to Fremen-splain everything you need to know after you've watched Season 1 of Dune Prophecy. And it's that usual time in my intro that I have to remind you that Legendary Entertainment is Nerdist's very own Reverend Mother Superior and produces both Dune and Dune Prophecy. But you can call me Miles Tagg, as I'm fond of being a bit of a heretic of Dune. I'm a lifelong fan of these books. I'd be talking about them anyways. So, let's dive into this show so we can answer some of your biggest questions, talk about this show's wildest reveals, and then look at what could be in store after that cliffhanger ending as we keep our eye on the future of Dune. This video obviously spoils Dune Prophecy, but I'm also going to dig into some of the original Dune books to help explain some theories. Also, some of my theories and explanations are based on my personal interpretations from years of reading these books, so please don't take everything as canon, but feel free to ask any questions in the comments below in case you need anything else explained. I'll try to remain as general as I can when it comes to spoilers beyond Paul Atreides, but I'll also give you fair warning before I do so.
You can't do that.
So, with all of that said, if you don't want to get spoiled, take out your blade and cut this video off before it's too late.
Drive it into your throat!
First things first, let's take a step back and look at the world of the Duneverse at this point in its history. I've seen a lot of folks ask, hey Matt, specifically, if this show takes place 10,000 years before the events of Dune, then why does it look so similar so long ago? And yeah, 10,000 years is a long time. For us as a species, we were still in the Mesolithic age, and we've clearly made some major changes since then. Only in the last 150 years or so have we had an explosion of technological advancement, and I'm pretty sure if Frank Herbert were still alive, he would have some thoughts on today's AI. So, in the Duneverse, how in the heck would an empire last for 10,000 years with barely any changes between when it started and when Paul Atreides messed it all up? Well, in Dune, there's reasons. First off, let's address that Frank Herbert wanted to establish an extremely long period of stagnancy for humanity. This would have built up an enormous amount of tension as our species would want to break free. Once Paul Atreides arrived, he became the catalyst to relieve that tension through an explosive release of energy via war and revolution. So, how does this all happen? Let's look at what Frank Herbert established in Dune and extrapolate from there. First, we know the Butlerian Jihad, or the Great Revolt, occurred when humans rejected the use of thinking machines and automation, thus devolving society back into an analogous Stone Age in space. The religious fervor critical to the anti-machine movement deemed any advanced technology as heretical. The Orange Catholic Bible says, "Thou shalt not make a machine in the likeness of a human mind." And as the Imperium developed into an extremely pious society, any progressive innovation with technology was held in check.
That technology is forbidden!
The Imperium did, however, rely on two key items to function. The Holtzman effect was a scientific theory that provided the properties behind body shields, suspensors, glow globes, and the extremely important Holtzman engines that powered the Spacing Guild's ships. And the valuable spice melange was a mind and body altering drug that compensated for the lack of advanced machines. Together, the Holtzman effect and the spice were so tightly regulated and essential that their presence and use were constants throughout the entire 10,000 years of the Imperium. And spice itself was crucial for space travel. Without advanced machines to run the Holtzman engines, space travel relied on navigators. Navigators were humans who ingested so much spice their bodies mutated into weird fishy humanoid forms, but the spice granted them the prescience needed to chart safe pathways between the planets and stars. This made space travel and commerce extremely expensive, thereby limiting access to only the upper ruling classes who could afford it.
How much will it cost them?
3 guild navigators, a total of 1.46 million, 62 salaries round trip.
The majority of subjects in the Imperium would rarely leave their own planets, which kept many pockets of humanity isolated from each other. And what did most of these isolated people do on their home planets? Well, in a universe without advanced technology, production could really only function with sheer manpower. Many subjects of the Imperium were forced into the working class, or even worse, into slave labor, thus widening the gap in classes in this extremely feudalistic society and preventing anyone the freedom for innovation. As for the upper echelons of society, they formed a convoluted bureaucratic government with a massive representational body known as the Landsraad, and a complicated economic organization known as CHOAM. Since the spice melange can extend lifespans, and this upper caste was really the only group that could afford it, we can infer that most of the ruling class lived for long periods of time, which led to a stagnant governing body. Just like in today's government, with older politicians having served most of their lives, we can recognize a lack of rapid progressive reform without a constant renewal of leadership. And lastly, one of the most important factors maintaining the status quo of the Dune Imperium is the Bene Gesserit. As we saw in Dune Prophecy and later in Dune, the Bene Gesserit secretly controlled the Imperium from the shadows. And once the Sisterhood developed its breeding program to produce a Kwisatz Haderach, it would need to meticulously maintain the rate of humanity's progress for 90 generations. Paul Atreides was not the only candidate to be the Kwisatz Haderach.
We have other prospects, if he fails his promise.
And that means that the Bene Gesserit would have been manipulating the lives and progress of countless families and bloodlines until the time was exactly right.
But our plans are measured in centuries.
So for me, those seem to be plenty of reasons why the Carino Empire could last for 10,000 years and roughly remain the same. Lack of innovation, religious fear, limited access to travel and commerce, a rigid class system, sluggish bureaucracy, and a shadowy organization manipulating our gene pool would altogether halt a society's development. I would also like to remind all of you of Isaac Asimov's Foundation series, which has a galactic empire that lasted over 10,000 years. And I'm pretty sure Frank Herbert was having fun criticizing Asimov's analogy for the Roman Empire as well. What little innovation that did occur during the Carino dynasty developed more in the fringe societies of the Imperium, especially with the Ixians and the Tleilaxu.
Uri, my favorite Ixian.
Dune Prophecy gave us our first on-screen appearance of the Ixians, a race of humans who constantly pushed the boundaries of technological advancement. House Urchesi continued developing machines and technology, but only so they could secure profits and political power. The Ixians, however, were notorious for creating forbidden technology to be sold on the black markets, usually to rich noble houses who would never openly admit that they relied on machines. The show also reveals an early form of a hunter-seeker, the type of assassin's tool used in an attempt to kill Paul thousands of years later. But unlike Paul's hunter-seeker that required a human to pilot it, this proto-hunter-seeker was fully autonomous, which confirms how thinking machines were still present in the early days of the Imperium. And if you've read all of the Dune books, you're aware that the threat of fully autonomous hunter-seekers could potentially return, but we'll touch on that later in this video. As for the other race of humans pushing the boundaries on innovation, the Tleilaxu focused more on biomolecular engineering. Unlike the Bene Gesserit, who use their own bodies to transmutate chemicals and improve their physical abilities, the Tleilaxu use their mysterious axolotl tanks to generate their immoral experiments and products. During the Butlerian Jihad, they produced body parts for casualties of war, giving them the nickname of flesh merchants. As time went on, they developed Golas, artificial humans generated from the tissues of dead flesh. And they also created genetically modified shapeshifters known as face dancers. Dune Prophecy doesn't introduce us to any of the Tleilaxu directly, but we do meet one of their experiments. Theo is revealed to be a proto-face dancer, an early attempt at what we will eventually see during the time of Paul Atreides and beyond. Face dancers were used throughout the Imperium as performers, or sexual toys, but they were also dangerous as hired assassins who could impersonate and also replace their targets. In the books, it's not exactly clear when face dancers were first introduced, but it's believable that during the time of Dune Prophecy, the Tleilaxu could have already been venturing into creating their infamous shapeshifters. If we get a season 2, we may find out more of Theo's mysterious past and why she is no longer with her creators. Also, the Bene Gesserit don't usually ally themselves with the mysterious Tleilaxu, but Theo's use of her special abilities shows her full acceptance of the Sisterhood's order.
Thank you, Theo.
And speaking of Theo's abilities, we should also explain her transformation into Valya's brother, Griffin Harkonnen. Unless you've read the books, you may have missed a few formative moments in Valya's childhood and just how important Griffin was to her. As children, the two developed each other's fighting skills and had an inseparable bond after Valya saved Griffin from drowning. Valya and Griffin aimed at restoring the glory of House Harkonnen's name by sending Griffin as a representative to the Landsraad, while Valya trained with the Sisterhood. But in a blink-and-you'll-miss-it moment from the show, Griffin goes from a cool-ass bro to cold as snow in a single cut. And that time gap basically spans almost the entire book, Sisterhood of Dune, in which Griffin attempts to exact revenge on Vorian Atreides, who recently reappeared. Griffin's journey takes him to Arrakis, where he finds Vorian, but the two reconcile their differences and become friends after Vorian explains all of the misunderstandings that started the Atreides and Harkonnen feud. Unfortunately, Griffin wasn't the only one trying to murder Vorian, and in a vicious attack from some other characters that I just don't have the time to explain right now, Griffin is accidentally killed instead of Vorian. Vorian then ships Griffin's body back to Lankavale, but should have written a better explanation in his letter, and the misunderstandings between the two families continued and the feud only got worse. For Valya, this only solidified her beliefs that the Atreides were the cause of all of her family's problems. In the book Mentats of Dune, Valya grooms Tula into a weapon and aims her at the Atreides on Caladan that we met in Tula's flashback. Tula also encounters Vorian during his trip to Caladan, but she has already been on assignment long enough to trick young Ori Atreides into falling in love with her. Instead of murdering the entire Atreides clan like we saw in the show, Tula murders only Ori on their wedding night and escapes before Vorian can capture her. The ending of the Schools trilogy sees a Reverend Mother Valya and Tula in a climactic fight with Vorian. Their battle ends with Vorian assumed dead, but he's definitely not, and Valya believing that she has exacted her revenge on her brother's murderer. But the books end with a major cliffhanger. Tula is still pregnant with Ori's child. And now we get to one of Dune Prophecy's biggest reveals and the answer to what happened to Tula's baby. At first, viewers and book readers were led to believe that Desmond Hart was an entirely new creation for the show, but now we know that he is Tula's forsaken son, coming back to exact revenge on the Order that abandoned him. And as revealed by the breeding index, Desmond is also the first offspring of both Atreides and Harkonnen bloodlines. But by giving up her son, Tula hopes to free her child from a predetermined future, one without an Atreides Harkonnen feud, one without the Sisterhood using him for his genetics. She wanted to give him an unknown future, which is basically what Frank Herbert wants for all of us. Desmond can be viewed as a precursor to Paul Atreides. Desmond isn't a Kwisatz Haderach. That concept hasn't been developed yet. But he exhibits the desired qualities of both Atreides and Harkonnen genetics that Paul will wield 10,000 years later. Unfortunately for the Imperium and the Sisterhood, Desmond is already proving why charismatic leaders are dangerous. Not only is Desmond able to resist the Sisterhood's powers of voice, but he understands how to undermine their manipulative schemes. He also inspires fanaticism among others, albeit with fear instead of loyalty. We see him ensnare the Emperor's favor, and he also forms a small force of fanatical soldiers, which I can only assume will eventually become the Emperor's elite fighting force, the Sardaukar. So after generations of war against the thinking machines, a time of martyrs and religious fanaticism that almost brought humanity to the brink of destruction, the Sisterhood is now witnessing it happen all over again with a leader like Desmond Hart. The Sisterhood's breeding program became a method to breed corruption out of human beings. But now, Desmond may be the inspiration for the Sisterhood to consider breeding a male Bene Gesserit, a Kwisatz Haderach. If humanity remains under constant threat of falling under the influence of dangerous leaders, then the Bene Gesserit should create their own leader, one that they can control, right? Well, unfortunately, this will ultimately backfire and cause massive consequences in the far future.
Abomination.
But now that we finally know who Desmond Hart really is, what about his power? Many fans were a bit skeptical about Desmond Hart having any sort of superpower in the first few episodes, because Dune doesn't really have superpowers. Get him out of here. In the books, during the Butlerian Jihad, the artificially intelligent overmind, known as Omnius, released a machine plague that killed billions. Raquela's research, as well as the medicinal qualities of spice, eventually cured the plague.
During the Omnius Plague, the machines designed a pathogen.
And now that we know Desmond has unleashed a new machine virus, I can only assume his exposure to the massive amounts of spice from the sandworm that ate him kept him immune to the virus's effects. This new machine virus attacks the amygdala and becomes triggered by fear. So yes, now in the Duneverse, fear is literally the mind killer.
Fear. That's what it's feeding off of, this virus.
But we are still left to wonder just how Desmond even survived being eaten by a giant sandworm. I mean, that recording definitely showed him getting Shai Hu chewed. And who is that mysterious figure performing surgery on Desmond's body? Is it the evil robot Erasmus? I hope not. But remember when I mentioned the Tleilaxu and the Ixians earlier in this video?
Uri, my favorite Ixian.
Aside from face dancers, the Tleilaxu have the ability to bring back the dead. Not with zombies, not with clones, but with gholas. Golas are reanimated flesh, either from a corpse or even a few cells generated in the Tleilaxu's mysterious axolotl tanks. Similar to replicants like in the Blade Runner universe, Golas could be genetically programmed to exhibit traits in addition to the original body's abilities. In some cases, through a traumatic process, a Gola body could recall its past memories. So, is Desmond a Gola? Well, just like how Theo is a protoform of the face dancers we'll eventually meet 10,000 years later, Desmond could be an early form of a Gola, but it wouldn't make sense for him to have any memories from before he died, since that ability won't be unlocked until much later. And it would also take quite a long time to regenerate his entire body out of the gullet of a sandworm. But one other major factor that the Tleilaxu are involved is that Desmond specifically relies on a false eye for his power. Even though the Tleilaxu are talented at regenerating organic material, softer organ tissues like that of the eye remained difficult for the Tleilaxu to grow. Instead, the Tleilaxu manufactured mechanical eyes that they claimed were better than organic ones, yet many Tleilaxu themselves preferred not to use them. In the books, the Fremen don't even trust Tleilaxu eyes, saying that they enslave their users. No one knows what trickery could be hidden within those eyes. So, could the eye implanted in Desmond's head be an early form of Tleilaxu eyes? And who would be technologically advanced enough to help manufacture those mechanical eyes?
Uri, my favorite Ixian.
Both the Ixians and House Rachezi developed advanced technology that flirted with the edicts of the Butlerian Jihad. But as we saw in the show, House Rachezi falls victim to the effects of Desmond's eye, and the Ixians would have plenty of motive to remove any competition in the world of technological advancement. The Ixians could be a prime suspect and co-conspirator with the Tleilaxu as they rebel against this fledgling empire that just recently outlawed advanced machines. But for the final reason why the Ixians could be behind Desmond relies on us to look far into the future of the Dune saga. Let's finally take a look at the prophecy side of Dune prophecy. Like any good prognostication, there's no clear answer, except from those who claim to have the answer. With the key to the reckoning is one born twice, once in blood, once in spice, we have reason to believe throughout the season that this could apply to either Desmond or Lila. And when the prophecy continues, a revenant full of scars, a weapon born of war, on a path too short, that must be referring to Desmond, right? But as we heard from Raquela's initial prophecy, she warned of Terran Arafel and of a tyrant. Now, to fully explore what this prophecy could mean, we definitely need to dive into spoiler territory again, especially into Dune Messiah and also God Emperor of Dune, which specifically references Arafel and a tyrant. But if you haven't read that far ahead into the books and you don't want to be spoiled, time for you to sign and sign off for now. You can skip ahead here to when we speculate about Season 2. Arafel is a Hebrew term referenced many times in the Torah and the Bible. It's a fog or a dark cloud, usually obscuring a holy judgment. And in the case of Dune, it's associated with Kralazek, the time of the final battle and judgment at the end of the universe. As for a tyrant, many of us know that Frank Herbert wrote Dune as a warning for charismatic leaders and their destructive effects. In Dune Messiah, Paul Atreides and his Fedaykin forces have conquered the known universe. Paul leads as a religious and political figurehead for his new empire. Paul only continues along his darker path because he alone can foresee a darker future for humanity without his leadership. But many of his subjects see his actions as tyrannical and apocalyptic after he overthrew the status quo of the last 10,000 years. Paul had been born of blood from the Lady Jessica, and then he figuratively died during the Spice Agony and was reborn as a revenant, the Kwisatz Haderach.
Kwisatz Haderach.
He only seized the throne by threatening to destroy all of spice production on Arrakis, which could have brought about humanity's downfall. And by the end of Dune Messiah, he becomes locked into a path that brings about a tragic end to his story. So, is Paul the prophesized tyrant that the early sisterhood is trying to prevent? No! Well, hold on a minute, because we also have to talk about another Dune sequel, God Emperor of Dune. In the books, Paul's son, Leto II, takes up his father's mantle to prove to humanity they still didn't learn their lesson with his dad. With even more powerful abilities than his father, Leto II becomes a god figure, a tyrant that holds the Imperium in stasis for the next 3,500 years as he leads humanity along his golden path. How does he do this? Well, first he was born in blood from his mother Chani. On the actual day of his birth, there was quite a bit of murder and death, and his twin sister was named Ganima, which translates to spoil of war. As a child, Leto II became so saturated with spice that he was able to combine his body with baby sandworms until he himself transformed into a sandworm, allowing him to live for thousands of years. I know it's weird, but trust me, it makes sense when you read it, and I will forever love Leto II, even if he were a worm. But the reason why we must look so far as God Emperor of Dune is that Leto II specifically mentions seeing Arafel in his visions of the future. He is a tyrant that brings humanity to the brink of destruction so that it can avoid its actual downfall. And in this vision of Arafel, he specifically mentions the return of machines, like autonomous hunter-seekers, that hunt down and destroy the human race. And in the books, the Ixians increasingly become more and more of a threat as more and more humans begin relying on advanced technology again. With the threat of thinking machines still present in Dune prophecy, plus the brief appearance of the Ixians, and now that we have seen the direct involvement of machine technology in Desmond Hart, the show is paving the golden path forward for thinking machines to inevitably return and for Arafel to play out. So, will Valya understand just how far into the future Raquel's prophecy could reach? Valya immediately had strong convictions on the Sisterhood's plan to avoid creating a tyrant and bringing about Terran Arafel. But could Valya's interpretation of the prophecy bring about the danger she hopes to prevent? Throughout the Dune saga, Frank Herbert constantly warns us that an oracle can lock their future into a singular vision, and that can have dangerous effects. Even Reverend Mother Kasha was aware of this possibility.
And what if this plan of yours causes the very thing we seek to prevent?
But throughout the rest of the series, we see Valya's dogged insistence that her interpretation of Raquel's prophecy is the correct path forward.
I'm the one that Raquel asked for as she lay dying. I shall see the burning truth.
And however Desmond is eventually defeated, Valya's actions may lock humanity onto a dark path into the future. As for what the future of Dune prophecy holds, our prescience can only see so far as we wait to hear if we get a second season or not. The future of the Sisterhood itself is in trouble as Lila has succumbed to abomination. This is when a sister's other memory takes over their mind and ancestral personalities can come forth. Dorothea has essentially returned from the dead and has revived a new anti-machine fervor among the pious acolytes. And what will happen when Valya and Tula return to the Sisterhood now that Dorothea has revealed their dark secret? Raquel, Dorothea, and also Lila are all descendants of Vorian Atreides, so we could possibly see the Harkonnen feud continue within the Sisterhood.
Atreides.
Next up, who will lead the Imperium now that Havoko is dead? Will Inez abandon her title now that she has rebelled against her family? Will Constantine assume the title of Emperor? And how will that affect Natalia? What if Inez returns to challenge Constantine for the throne? And now that Valya, Inez, and Caron are on Arrakis, we could see their journey lead them in many directions as they hunt down Desmond's original captors. Will they team up with Michaela, the Fremen sister from the rebellion? Will Caron learn more about Valya and Tula's involvement in the death of his ancestors? Could we potentially see a Carino Atreides heir born from Inez and Caron? And most importantly, could we see the beginnings of the Missionaria Protectiva on Arrakis?
Listen, Argabe!
Anyways, folks, that's everything we think you should know after watching Dune Prophecy. We'll keep spicing things up here at Nerdist as we peer into the future. But for now, tell us, what did you think of the show? How could it potentially affect the rest of the Duneverse? And do you think Vorian Atreides could actually show up in a season 2?
What do you mean, Vorian? Vorian Atreides?
Let us know in the comments below, and for the latest and spiciest in the world of pop culture, stay tuned to Nerdist.com.